because we've done the webinars and covered a lot on species mixes with the multi-species crops, I'm going to talk more about the bigger picture stuff to start with here, because I'm fairly sure I didn't cover that in the webinar, so I actually don't know what I've covered now. And this is a big one. We wonder about what's happened today, but actually agriculture started about 10,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, around the Middle East. And what happened then was domestication of animals, domestication of sheep first, and then cattle, and then growing crops. It's been a slow, insidious ride, but especially growing crops, but grazing poorly as well, has destroyed grasslands and soil all over the world. And it's done it for that amount of time. It hasn't happened just yesterday, it's been a long journey. So we need to look at what we've done for 10,000 years, and for 10,000 years we've got it wrong. So I'm going to skip a few years now, and talk about what's happened in more recent times. But certainly after the Second World War, and many of you know this story, there were certainly concerns about growing enough food for the human population, like growing populations in the world. The same thing's spoken about today. But after the Second World War, there was a sort of quite a push there. And the new agricultural revolution was developed to address these problems. And that has been now labelled the Green Revolution. It was labelled that at the time. But and what it was doing was developing high-yielding crops, and with the addition of fertiliser and pesticides, got those crops to yield to their maximum. Now, I think initially their motives were justified and good, but it turns out to be a disaster. So that Green Revolution was actually very successful. And my father adopted a lot of those Green Revolution things in the 1950s and 60s, so I grew up with a lot of this stuff. And it was very successful in that it produced huge amounts of food, which is what it set out to do. And certainly reduced hunger or some poverty around the world. And it did create wealth for farmers at that time. So it sounds like a great idea. And really, if you think about it that way, what could possibly go wrong? And that's what people thought in that era. It was so good that this is going to revolutionise everything forever. So what could possibly go wrong? It's actually created many problems. It's been an ecological disaster. Not just for our farms, but for the planet itself. And most of the problems that's going on now in relation to changing climate and destroyed soils and all of that stuff, destroyed whole planetary ecosystems, is related to that Green Revolution. So, but on our farms we're getting declining soil health is a serious one, which means now we have a dependency on fertiliser. And it gets quite interesting that the companies that developed all this got us as farmers addicted to fertiliser and pesticides along the way. And part of that is actually a reduction in food quality. And that's one of the big ones, which is really ever spoken about. Half the reason why we need to take vitamin tablets every day is poor quality food. But we need to remember that poor quality food is caused by poor quality soil. It comes back to soil every time. So, and then we start to have human health problems associated with that. So it's a bigger story than we sort of realise. It's not just a planetary thing, it's a human health issue as well. So, but an interesting but a serious one, the wealth now is actually with multinational companies. Remember earlier I said here wealth was with the farmers, but now wealth with multinational companies. And this is some really interesting data. I don't know whether I've shown you this before, I probably have, but, and it's Canadian, and now and this is data from 1926 to 2016. Really interesting, in this area from the 1920s to the late 1970s, farmers were going sort of okay. Multinational companies were always making more money, of course. But after about, sort of from 1980 on, and this is Canada, but Australia would be no different, multinational companies start making billions of dollars and farmers are going broke. So a lot of the problem with farms now is not necessarily that the farmers aren't necessarily doing farming badly, it's just that we're getting ripped off by these multinational companies. That has to change. That's bloody nearly criminal, what's happening there. But we can change it. We can stop being dependent on these multinational companies. And we can, and that's part of what the regenerative agriculture, for the want of a better word, say movement around the planet, is on about. We're all getting sick of this stuff happening and getting wrong, really. So that green revolution really can't be afforded any longer. Well, certainly on a farming level, it can't be. And if you think about it, it's happened for a long time. The farmers end up getting the wrong end of the pineapple all the time. We get the rough end, not the better end. So, and this is really what happens. Many things we do in agriculture make someone else wealthy, not the farmers. And part of that of being so tight on the land is why farmers make decisions that, well, basically to keep the bank manager happy, which is really not good long term and certainly not good for their farms. So if we look at what's happened, ploughing and high rates of fertiliser and pesticides have done serious damage to the farms, to our farms. It's been an ecological disaster. And one of when conventional agriculture looks at, or industrial agriculture, look at problems on farms, they always look at it or see it the wrong way. Problems on farms are actually not agricultural ones, but they're ecological problems, like insect attack and crop disease and declining soil nutrition or soil nutrients, declining soil carbon are all related to ecology, the farm ecology. Our farm ecosystems are collapsed and our planetary ecosystems are collapsing. So, the recommended solutions from a conventional industrial agriculture thing is recommended solutions are more fertiliser, herbicide and insecticides. We rarely address the reasons why. And which is I have got myself into trouble by, I call that moron agriculture, because to fix the problems we put more and more product on. More fertiliser, more pesticides, more of everything. But that's what we're told to do. By the best science of the day, I might add, which is, so we need to remove ourselves from that stuff. So, increasing fertiliser and pesticides won't fix the problems. The farm ecosystem is broken. That's the problem. And it's actually not very hard to fix. This is not a difficult thing to fix at all. It's easy to fix. And better than that, it doesn't cost much money. So in other words, I've got nothing to sell you. So we need to allow the farm and the soil to function as an ecosystem. And what that does, as it starts to function as an ecosystem, then we have more diverse pastures, or we start restoring our pastures and our grasslands on our properties, which means better nutrient cycling, and that adds up to less fertiliser, or even to a point where no fertiliser. So no insect attack means no insecticide, no fungicides, less animal disease, and all that adds up to more profit. Now, the industrial model will say that that's impossible, you can't do that. But remember, all they're interested in is selling us things. I hope there's no agronomists or produce sales people here today. Well, I hope there would be, actually. They never are, I might add.
Oh, you gotta get them in there. Come on. Is there anyone? No? There's nobody.
Actually, it's really interesting. There's more and more trained agronomists adopting, and they often call themselves either environmental agronomists or ecological agronomists, which is really good. I mean, that's a good way to go for agronomy to go. So, how do we do all this stuff? Which is part of what we're going to be doing today, is looking at ways of doing this, and there's a lot of different ways. What I'm going to talk about is only one way. There's a lot of different methods and techniques out there that we can use to help our farms improve in a better way. So, but really it starts here, by fixing our soil. But when I talk about fixing soil, most people think of putting more fertiliser on. It is not about putting fertiliser on. It can be. There's nothing. I should explain that. There's nothing wrong with putting fertiliser on, but what we are doing and what we have done is put too much on. And if we put too much fertiliser on, that does a serious damage to soils and soil microbiology. Stops and destroys the soil ecosystem. Too much of that. So the best way to fix our soil is by growing more plants. Now, which seems a strange way, because again, and how many times have you been told this? If we get told if a plant is growing there, it's removing nutrients and we don't put fertiliser on. But that's the biggest heap of bullshit we've ever been told, because if a plant is growing, what it's actually doing is cycling nutrients. If you cut that plant off and remove it, take it away, you remove nutrients. But if it's growing, it's cycling nutrients, round and round and round. And when you think about it, it has to be that way. I mean, 1 million years ago, no one was running around with a bag of fertiliser to make things grow. And all we're really talking about with this stuff is mimicking natural systems as closely as we possibly can, because old Mother Nature got it right in the first place. She was always right. We're the ones that have stuffed up.
Colin.
So, yeah. Yes, please ask questions as we go.
So those white blue flowers in there, not the dark ones, what plants are those?
They're all actually native. That's a native grassland at home.
Right.
And these are glycines, like a native legume. So they're like a little pea.
They're right, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things in there, including those little glycines and minces of that's taken in the middle of summer at home. So they're all summer growing species.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
You've got about, what, 150 different species or something?
Yeah, there's not 150, but in native species there's about 60, but there's other as well. So it's probably getting close to around about 100 anyway at home in the grasslands. So we need to cover our soils and farms with a diverse range of living plants. And diversity here is the key to this. We need a diverse range of plants. And plants will restore our farms and soils and certainly profit, but not monocultures of plants. Growing monocultures is a big part of the problem. Like monocultures of wheat, but also our pastures. Like we sow a pasture of ryegrass and clover. And if our grasslands, all through these areas everywhere in Australia, or in most countries, would have had at least between 200 and 300 species in the grasslands. And here we're growing pastures with 2 in them. I mean, no wonder it fails. It's not even close to replicating a grassland. And that's part of what we're on about. As we move forward, you'll find multi-species crops are a part of the transition to getting our properties right. They're not the total answer, but they're really good for many things and part of the transition. But as we start moving into pastures and re-establishing pastures, we need to look at a lot of diversity of species in them.
Can I just say, we saw this documentary on Bundan Shiga the other day, and she was saying there used to be 400,000 types of rice?
Of rice?
400,000 varieties of rice.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, growing in India.
Yeah. It was interesting. Elaine was there. I was doing a talk off the subject. Shouldn't get me off the subject, so I've done stories. I was talking to university students at Sydney Uni about this sort of stuff, and they were ag science, and others, most of them were going into the big bad world as agronomists. But before we did that, I'd start on the rice story. One of the lecturers, one of the professors at uni, went into his office and he was talking about stuff, and they were doing work on native rice up in Northern Territory, and they didn't know how to harvest it. And he said that they were going to genetically modify the rice plant so that they could harvest it. And I nearly had a heart attack. And I simply told him, why don't you just windrow it like you do with canola? Let it post ripen in the windrows, and then he had big wide eyes like a big kid, and he'd never heard of anything like that. He thought I was a genius. I mean,
that's what the Aborigines did.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, no, yeah. So we've got a long way to go. Yeah, the first thing was to modify the plant. So anyway, so to restore our farms and property, we don't want monocultures of plants. We want to restore grasslands, or when I talk about restoring grasslands, native grasslands are good, but we don't necessarily need it to be native, as long as there's a lot of diversity in our pastures and they function like grasslands. That's what we're talking about with that. And we perennial crops I've got here, or perennial cover crops, is actually pasture cropping, which is the stuff I've developed. I'm not going to talk very little about pasture cropping today, and then multi-species crops, multi-species annual crops are really what we're talking mostly about. So we can do this by growing more plants and more plants, really is the key to this. And these multi-species crops that we're talking about mimic the function of a grassland in that, okay, it's all totally artificial, but we talk about restoring, how do we restore a farm or even just a single paddock? So we're putting more diversity in there so it functions better. Ecologically, it starts to restore the soil ecosystem. I'm going to just talk a little bit about grasslands because, not a lot about grasslands, but and how that all functioned, because Old Mother Nature had all the answers anyway, has got all the answers anyway, so we need to learn from what actually happens in natural systems. So for many millions of years, grasslands have dominated the planet. Australian grasslands are at least 30 million years old, and they think they might even be around 50 million years old. So very old grasslands. Been around for a long time. And they fed many millions of grazing animals as well as predators and humans in the past. The grassland species, if you think about it, grasslands don't suffer from disease, rarely ever suffer from insect attack or anything like that. And that's because everything is in balance. Nothing ever goes wrong. If something gets out of increase in numbers, there's always something there to eat them. Like, for example, when I harvest native grass seed at home, we spread the seed out on the ground to dry, and it's just crawling with spiders, all sorts of spiders. There's spiders in a grassland in the insect world are the top predator. So if you've got lots of spiders, everything beneath that is pretty good. You can't get a big, fat, healthy spider unless it's got something to eat. So, just telling stories again. Just in relation to that, just something I found fascinating. After the 2019 very, very dry seasons, or 3 dry years that are up our way, and pretty well everywhere, but we got a break in the season early 2020 last year, and grasses grew like mad, and so started harvesting the seed. And what was interesting, and that was in about February last year, there was no spiders in the grassland, but there were thousands and thousands of lady beetles. No spiders, and I was puzzled by this. There were lady beetles and all sorts of other insects. And then the penny dropped. Of course, and I thought, of course there can't be any spiders there because they have to come later. If the spiders hatch before the lady beetles and all the others, they'd have nothing to eat. And I thought, geez, Mother Nature is really clever. So it had to happen in a sequence, and I found that fascinating. But then the penny dropped. As we continued harvesting for sort of about a month later, then there was spiders. So, yeah. Off the subject again, but if you're using insecticide, you're not going to have any of those there. Yeah. Okay. So, how did the original grasslands grow huge amounts of food without insect attack or diseases or fertiliser? In balanced grassland ecosystems, nutrients are cycled and made available. Plant disease and insect attack are controlled by the natural enemies, which is where I was getting at with the spiders and lady beetles. In other words, our farms can function the same way. That's really where we're getting at. So, if we've got all that happening, heaps of spiders, heaps of insects, what do you need a pesticide for? Everything is in control. See, so that's how we weed off all of these things, and how we really should go to become fully organic. That's the way to do it. You know, let Mother Nature run it for us. Then you won't have any problems. But it needs to be a transition, and that's part of what we're talking about with these multi-species crops. So, question I get asked all the time, especially by really angry agronomists, so where do plant nutrients come from? Now, this planet of ours is over 4 billion years old. All the nutrients that are in our soils now were here at day one. All the nutrients, except for nitrogen, were here in the rock on this planet. It was just a big ball of rock, and that rock contained all the minerals and nutrients that we have now. So, and bacteria and fungi and enzymes and acids broke down that rock and accessed the minerals. Plants evolved and created the cycle of life, death and decay, and built soil. In other words, if we didn't have plants and microbes, we would not have soil on this planet. Plants really are the drivers of everything. So that's how where all the minerals came from. So they haven't gone anywhere. Well, maybe some have got washed in the oceans with bad management, but they really haven't gone anywhere. And it is possible, and it's certainly showing up in some of the soil tests we're doing at home, because all of the minerals are increasing at home, not decreasing. And there's a fair chance that those minerals are still coming from the parent material where they came from in the first place. I've got a bit of information on that. Are you going to keep time for me, Dean? Because I might be here for 3 days if you don't stop me.
I think we'll run out of food by then. Yeah, no, I'll keep an eye on it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yell out when we want to have a bit of smoke or something.
And I think in terms of drinks and so on, we just get up and grab a coffee.
Yeah. So, how do plants make soil nutrients available? Now, I love this little fella. Gabe Brown gave me that when I was in the States a couple of years ago, this slide. And it's a water bear. We need to remember that our soil is a living, breathing, subaquatic ecosystem. It's alive. There's over 6 billion microbes in a small spoonful of healthy soil. It's got to be healthy soil. So almost as many people as there are on the planet in a small spoonful of soil. Now, I've got no idea who counted them, but I tend to be. And a lot of them are voted by these. I'm going to touch a bit on this at the end of how all this sort of comes together. How does it all sort of work? Not that I really know, so I'll probably just make something up, but no one really knows. It's a bit complex. But this is just a little snapshot of it, of how it all works. Soil microbes require plants for food. And they feed on a couple of things. They certainly feed on decaying material, like leaf litter and grass litter and all of that. But the big one, which is usually overlooked, is plant root exudates, or sugars that are pumped out of the plant roots. And it's interesting, photosynthesis is all driven by photosynthesis, which is basically carbon dioxide and sunlight, which it's an amazing process. You know all that anyway. But almost half of the energy or the sugars that a plant produces is pumped into the soil. Now you'd think, well, what a dreadful waste that is, but Mother Nature's too clever for that. Nothing's ever wasted. So it's obviously pumping into the soil for a reason. And the reason is it's pumping it into the soil to feed soil microbes. And microbes, like many of there's bacteria, fungi, protozoo, nematodes, huge range of microbes. But one in particular that's been studied is mycorrhizal fungi, and it attaches itself to the roots of a plant and siphons off those sugars or exudates coming out of the plant root. But the plant doesn't do that for nothing. No free rides in Mother Nature either. The fungi supplies nutrients back to the plant. It extends the root area of the plant, and supplies minerals, nutrients, and water back to the plant as well. Now, another thing too, and this is important, especially when we're trying to do this organically or anyway, a couple of things kill mycorrhizae. One of them is too much soil disturbance, too much ploughing and tillage, and the other one is too much fertiliser and pesticides generally. Superphosphate or phosphorus fertiliser also is antagonistic to mycorrhizae. So we need to work out the balance there, because it's very, very important to keep all microbes alive. And while we're on microbes, we think about ploughing. I'm going to talk a fair bit about ploughing today, because many of you are organic producers. And we're in this, all of us here are microbes in the soil. Now, if you think about someone put a great big steel blade right through this building here and turned everything upside down, not going to do us much good, us microbes in here. So ploughing is really, really damaging to soil and soil life. So we need to be careful about how we do it, and not, if we have to, as little as we possibly can. So that's really important if we want to keep restoring our soil ecosystem and doing it well. So, but on the other hand, high levels of pesticides also, if someone blew a whole heap of pesticide in this door, it wouldn't do us much good either. So it's always finding the right balance that will work for us. So here's a little bit of data which is really interesting and it's been overlooked for a long time. And I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but it does show what happens with plants. Tim Wiley used to work for the West Australian Department of Agriculture. And Tim did a great job in West Australia. He did too good a job when somebody was moved sideways. The farmers loved him. He was very, very good. But he studied what was happening underneath the plant. And in Western Australia, on the sand there's a fair gap between the plants. So you've got bare ground and then a plant. So Tim took soil samples underneath the plant and then between the plants. And the results are fascinating. Just the carbon levels to start with were a 400 times increase underneath the plant compared to out on the bare soil alongside the plant. Phosphorus had increased by 300%, potassium by 300%, sulphur by almost 300%, and a big increase in pH, soil pH. Now, it's the plant that's driving all that, nothing else, just the plant. And that just about tells the story on its own of what plants do. But that data's been totally overlooked by just about everyone. Yep.
With that in mind, if you're planting a crop, particularly a summer crop that ends up quite sparse, how close would two different plants, say a legume and a brassica, have to be before they're having an effect?
They can be virtually almost on top of each other because they're complementary.
But if it's sparse and they're quite far apart, can they still...
Yeah, that's a good question which I really don't fully know the answer. But yeah, if they're that far apart, they'll still do some good, but you won't have that interaction as much. And it's interesting, it's off the subject, but it does answer, sort of is relevant to what you say. Been a lot of studies, mostly in the northern hemisphere, with forests and trees, and how, and I'll bet it happens in Australia here too, about that mycorrhizal connection I mentioned. It's a different species of mycorrhizae, but how trees are interconnected, and often you'll have a mother tree supporting all of these trees around. And if a tree gets a disease in it, nutrients will be pumped underground to that sick tree. It's quite fascinating. Trees just aren't on their own, which is amazing stuff. But that's only fairly new stuff, new data that's been discovered. Yeah, trees are more complex and plants are more complex than we think. But yeah, you want them close enough so that it can be supportive. Yeah.
So Colin, what does that mean in terms of either leaving or replacing trees in your grasslands?
Yes, I really interested me. The best I've seen of that, not only trees, there's definitely an ecological connection between trees and grasslands, especially our native trees, and the same ecological connection with grasslands and trees. And the best example I saw of that was in Tasmania about 25 years ago. I was down there, and they're all the Tasmanians. We go around the bus trip, and they were people were just not complaining, but talking about, were worried about these big old trees dying, and they were blaming the possums. The possums up there killing the tree, which was not the case at all. An idiot here, me, on the bus there, and I said out loud, I said, they're dying of loneliness. Well, that went over like a lead balloon. But I actually was serious, because they'd lost their support mechanism around it. There was nothing to support these trees growing on their own, because all of the pastures around these native trees were introduced. They may as well have been in England, these trees, these big old eucalypt trees, because the whole ecosystem of Tasmania has been changed that much. There's nothing to support these trees. So you can just about bet it's an ecological problem. And certainly not the possums killing them. So yeah, there's a lot more, there's an awful lot we don't know. It's really, that's what's fascinating about a lot of this stuff. Okay. So in other words, it's plants that cycle nutrients, plants that create topsoil, plants that create good structured soil, and plants that build soil carbon. Soil carbon, you will never build soil carbon without plants. We won't do any of that without plants. But it's not very difficult to do. This stuff is very simple. Why it all works, as we said a while ago, with the interaction between it, is extremely complex. We don't need to fully understand that. it's quite easy to implement this stuff. So, how do we restore our farms? We change the way we graze animals, and the days that you're doing with Dick Richardson certainly will address that. So grow crops without killing existing grassland, which is pasture cropping. Grow multi-species cover crops, which is primarily what we're going to talk about today. But do all of that. There's no reason why you can't do all of it. Like, if we look about, there's a lot of really good ideas out there, like Peter Andrews as river restoration work is really good. Permaculture methods of agriculture are really good. There's a lot of very good stuff out there. The more, if we can put many of these things together, we'll actually get greater gains. Yeah.
I'm just not quite clear about the difference between pasture cropping and multi-species.
Okay. Yeah. Good question. Now, pasture cropping can also be multi-species crops. Now, a true cover crop, I generally don't talk about, I talk about multi-species crops as a crop, not as a cover. This will appear to get off track, but I'll get back. The Americans grow cover crops with annual multi-species crops, like we were talking about. And those covers are used as a soil primer and to cover soil, fix soil structure, cycle nutrients, so that then they can have a following cash crop afterward. And that's what the Americans use true cover crops for. Pasture cropping, where we're sowing crops into grassland, into grass, is perennial cover cropping. The other is annual cover cropping. But we can also sow, with pasture cropping, sow a multi-species crop into grassland as well. And then you start getting really, really great gains, which is good perennial land.
So when you say perennial pasture cropping, you're planting perennial species, or you plant annual species into perennial grass?
The other way around, we're planting annual crops into perennial grass.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say this story about Gabe Brown and I are pretty good mates, and we're always sharing information. And it's to do with many Americans and American scientists as well. So we're sharing information, so we can get this information out there around the world really quickly if we get failures or successes, which we do. But anyway, Gabe and I have also had quite a few beers together at different times, so he knows about my beer drinking expertise. Unfortunately. But anyway, I started doing multi-species crops in about 1911 or 10 or 11, somewhere around there, about 10, 12 years ago. Gee, I'm not that up.
Must have been those beers.
So, anyway, I started to email again about what I was doing, and I started planting multi-species crops into grasslands. And Gabe come back with a reply. He said, "Oh, wow," he said, "that's a great idea." He said, "Us Americans could never get drunk enough to think of something like that." so that was Gabe's response. Anyway, let's really keep going here. So did I, after all that, did I answer your question about the difference between a multi-species crop and pasture cropping?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. So, multi-species crops can solve many of our problems, and it's important. This one here, to use it for transitioning our farms to function as a grass. I'm talking about if you've got a paddock that's really an old cropping paddock, a paddock that's really going quite poorly, getting a diverse mix of plants in there, these fast-growing annuals, will start to restore the ecology or the ecosystem in that paddock or a whole farm. Now, multi-species crops are also biological soil primers, so that's an important thing to know. Like, because you've got a good species mix there, with pumping whole evolution into the soil, and increasing the diversity of soil microbes as well, they're acting as soil primers in that sense, and the good mix of plants like radish, tillage radish and turnips and those are breaking up the soil and helping soil structure. So they're actually soil primers as well. Yeah, as I said before, single species crops are part of the problem. Multi-species crops address many problems, but it's important to include cereals, brassicas and legumes in the mix. And also things like that aren't actually legumes, like the summer crops, sunflowers, and other things that actually are broadleaf plants that aren't necessarily legumes. And I would have gone through this in some of the webinars, but it won't hurt to go back through it. We can use them for many different things, and different combinations of plants. Different combinations of plants will get different outcomes. So, obviously forage, and that's a big attraction of multi-species crops. It's interesting. Multi-species crops is the fastest adoption of anything in Australia that I've ever seen. People have adopted it really quickly. Just they understand it pretty quickly and almost instinctively know that it's going to be better feed for their livestock, and it definitely is. So forage, obviously. On the other hand, another story. The Americans never worked that out. Interestingly, like the Americans were putting their cattle into feedlots. So they had them on grass, put them into feedlots, and then they were growing these multi-species crops, and then terminating them, either with herbicide or roller, and then planting their cash crop into them. And I was talking to Gabe Brown one time, and I said, Gabe, why don't you graze these things?
You want to explain who Gabe Brown is and whatever?
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there's a book up there, Gabe Brown, actually, if anyone's interested in it. Yeah, Gabe would be one of the best known farmers in the world. He lives in North Dakota, where it's really cold. And he's really promoting, especially in America, these multi-species crops and covers and that. And yes, he's extremely well known there. So, and doing a great job over educating people, but a very good job on his own farm. So anyway, Gabe's growing, well, as all the American farmers, growing these crops and just terminating them. And I said, Gabe, why don't you graze these things? And he said, can you graze them? And the reason why, not that Gabe's stupid, he's very low. But the Americans got locked into putting animals in feedlot, and they lost the art of not only grazing pastures, but especially grazing crops. And hardly anyone ever grazed crops with animals in the US. So then a few of them started grazing them, and then that part of it's expanding all the time. However, in Australia here, we never lost the art of grazing crops. All we're doing with the multi-species crops is taking it to another level. We've always grazed oat crops. So we didn't lose that knowledge here. The Americans certainly did. Okay. Preparing soil for a following crop, which is the sort of stuff I was just talking about. Increasing soil carbon is the obvious one. Nitrogen fixation, we're increasing nitrogen with the legumes in that mix. We can capture, recycle and redistribute nutrients, which is a very valuable thing for all forms of agriculture, but especially organic, where you're limited on chemical fertilisers. Certainly weed suppression, you can get good weed suppression with these crops. Soil compaction issues with that turnips and radish. We put flowering plants in the mixes to attract beneficial insects. Sort of the type of thing I was talking about with the spiders and ladybirds a while ago. Soil or plant disease problem. So we can fix many, or pretty well, I'd say all, no, I shouldn't say all, most problems that we have with different combinations of plants. designed specific to fix the problem. So, but the big one, which I'll go to, I know I presented the data from home on the grazing trials we did, but I'm going to show that again with some additional stuff that we've learned as it went on. So we can definitely get healthier animals, faster fattening, faster growth rate, and more food on multi-species crops. Now, we need to always remember that a multi-species crop is different to a multi-species pasture or a mixed pasture. One is based on perennial grasses, and these ones are annual plants. So they are different. These aren't long-lived. They're only really for a season. So there's often, if you go to some conventional field days, it's interesting, go to a conventional field day, they talk about problems all the time. You go to a regenerative type field day, very few people talk about problems, they talk about all the good things. But so it's a really just a subtle difference. But a conventional field day, an industrial agriculture field day, they talk about metabolic diseases on, say, oats or crops or brassicas or things. There's always something going wrong with the animals. Interestingly, if you have a mix of plants there, they don't get those diseases. They're very healthy. And I suppose that should be obvious. We're told that we need a mixed diet ourselves, but so if we ate chocolate or steak or any one thing all the time, we'd probably get belly crook too, I'd say. Yet we feed an old cow a paddock of oats or brassica and wonder why she gets bellyache. Or goes around the fence and eats all the weeds and doesn't eat the crop, which is what happened. So, this is just that some stuff on the trial that I did at home last year. I've been wondering, I observed at home how well the sheep, especially the Moreno lambs, did on multi-species crops. They just performed it, they grew faster. But I had no data on it. It was just an observation. So I thought, gee, it'd be good to collect some data on this. So there was actually a bit of some funding going around from MLA. It was an MLA state land care project. And so I applied for that and actually got it to do this project. What it was I should just backtrack a bit. We split a paddock, which was a 12 hectare paddock in half, 6 hectares each. So it was just an old paddock, so it was even, 2 even paddocks. And so barley on one side and a multi-species mix, which included barley, on the other paddock. So, I've got in here what they are. You probably already know what they are, but I'll repeat it again. This is just what a multi-species crop is, forage crop. Combination of up to 10 annual species, can be more than that, can be 20 if your imagination goes that far. So, they can be winter species sown in the autumn, or they can be summer species sown in late spring. Can be used as forage or a fodder crop. We're talking about mostly about fodder crops here today. Now this is an interesting one, and I've probably got this couple of slides in the wrong place here. And very important if you're thinking about fixing paddocks. I think it's really important information for everyone here. Now there's something that I've found that if you put a winter crop in, multi-species crop followed by a summer one, and then repeat that again into a really poor paddock, especially say an old cropping paddock with nothing on it, it will fix that paddock in a couple of years, especially the soil structure will improve. So it generally takes a couple of years, so there's 4 crops in a row in there, and it'll turn those paddocks around. But not only that, it'll prime it so that when you sow a pasture in there, you'll get a far better result. The soils will be a lot better to get better germination and success of a sown pasture. So to move it to a permanent pasture afterward. So that's the important thing, I think, if you're going to put money into to do it in a paddock more than once. If it's a really dysfunctional paddock, that'd be very important.
Colin?
Yep.
So exactly that point is the way we structured this program around the cover cropping, isn't it? So initially, like last year we started, cover cropping this year, we're building on that. And the idea is when we get those cycles, winter, summer behind us to a sufficient point, and then next year the focus will shift more towards the perennials.
Yes, getting a really good pasture mix. I mean, you're going to do a trial there on a 1 hectare block, and I brought down a little bit of native seed to trial in that pot of doing seeds, which would be really interesting to see how it goes. I even remember to put it in the car, which surprised me. So,
Can you overdo it?
sorry.
With the I mean, you said do 1 year followed by another. Can you sort of do it too often or?
Too often for multi-species? No, I don't think so. I don't see any reason why you couldn't continue to do that because it's constantly regenerating the paddock. It'd get to a stage, it would get expensive, and that's why you're better off to move it to a permanent pasture where you haven't spent any money on it. But you could different to growing a wheat crop, whereas it's just there's not enough diversity in there, and nutrients will start to decline in a wheat crop. But these ones they won't.
David Brandt's been growing multi-species crops in between his crops, what, for 30, 40 years?
Yeah, Dave started growing covers at least same time I started pasture cropping in the early 90s, so a long time. David Brandt is an American farmer in Iowa. He would be, I'd say, the best farmer in the world, but he like cropper, I mean, and he's been, as Tom said, growing multi-species crops for a long time. He's been really the leader in all of this stuff, and turned his place to very poor soil to, that rich soil with those methods. So, okay, we're back on this trial. Sorry if I had that out of order. So, divided into 2 hectare paddocks, both paddocks with pasture crop. And that does it, when we talk about multi-species, pasture cropping them is a good way to go, but for the group here, it doesn't have to be pasture cropped. You don't have enough perennials to do that. You could start down that track, but it's a little bit different process. Both areas were grazed heavy. We did use herbicide on this, and we did use fertiliser. We wanted it fairly conventional because for a reason, because MLA, we wanted to get that information out to as many conventional farmers as possible.
Do you think that that's had much of an effect on the soil biology?
I assume that all herbicide, it will do some damage to soil biology, but I don't think it's as bad, well certainly not as bad as Roundup. There's no doubt about that, but there's evidence coming through. Baxter is a newish herbicide, and it was used in the horticulture industry, and the cane fellows were using it in Queensland. And it won't kill perennial species, is why I use it with pasture crop, because I don't want to kill those perennial grasses, but it will control annual weeds.
What did you fertilise it with?
That was fertilised with fertiliser that had nitrogen, phosphorus and sulphur, which is crop lift 15 or something it's called, something like that. Which has got granite soils, it needs a bit of sulphur. Also the brassicas respond to sulphur as well. So now, as well as land weights, the trial monitored soil carbon, change in perennial species diversity, crop biomass, soil chemistry change, and profit. So we monitored all of that, which I'll give you information on that in a minute. This is the 2 paddocks. That barley crop was sown with 50 kilos of barley per hectare, and that's a fertiliser crop lift 15, which has that's breakdown of that. That's not a very high rate of fertiliser. The multi-species crop also had barley, field pea, fava bean, forage brassica, tilted radish and turnip. And they're the rates, but you'd already, I think, Dean, you're going to send this presentation out to people anyway, will you?
Yeah, I will. I've already got the previous one.
You'll have that. And yeah, that information you'd already have anyway. So, these are the costs. The barley crop cost $100 a hectare, without any sowing costs. And Dean, you've also gone further and worked out the actual sowing costs and everything on this, a bit more detail than what I've got on here. So the multi-species crop was $43 more expensive to sow. And that's the breakdown with the fertiliser in it as well, 183 to 140. And they found sort of two crops. People that are interested, that funny looking hill in the background is an extinct volcano at home. So the soil on near this isn't too bad, but it's yeah, on this one. Anyway, the grazing results. There was the same number of lambs placed on each paddock. Barley crop and multi-species crop was quite interesting. I won't go into all of that, rub you down. But if we look at the weight gains, where are we? On the barley crop, they put on, in total, in the 57 days, 8.5 kilos. And on the multi-species crop, they gained 17 kilos in weight. And they were weighed 3 times through that process. So it was a quite detailed trial. These lambs weren't actually sold and slaughtered, but we worked out their values from there because we knew their weights on what lambs were worth at the time. Now, and if we look at the paddock minus all of our costs, the barley crop made about $1,100 per hectare, and the multi-species crop was over 2,000. So it's almost double profit on that multi-species crop, which is, just from a profit point of view, is really interesting. But I find some of the even more interesting stuff is here later with the soil. And these are additional benefits: animal health, insect control, which I mentioned earlier, restoring soil ecosystem, increasing carbon. So,
with the previous one, because you didn't factor labour of your own machinery costs?
No, I didn't count my own labour and machinery costs.
So for every hour that you put in with your own time and machinery, you're getting a greater return.
On that, yeah, well that'd be right.
So when you do the gross margin, factor that in, the disparity actually increases.
That's interesting, yeah. And obviously we should put our machinery costs in there. But I tried to keep it as simple as possible for this. But,
Colin, would you expect, if you repeated this year after year, those differences would get greater?
I'd say that the weight gains would be similar, but these soil ones will definitely get greater. And we want to do it again. And it'd be really good for other people to do the same sort of trials and just see if we get the same results, in other areas. But I certainly encourage anyone in the group here to do that. It's well worth doing.
What was the history of the bit of land? Like, this is a bit of land you managed well for years, or did it get much better?
Yeah, great question. It's actually, because of some of that was basalt soil, but it's been, we've been on the place then for 150 years or something, not me personally. But my father grew a lot of wheat on this country, and then it was loosened paddocks. And so the paddock was really structured, the looser will do that. So they were in fairly poor condition, really, these paddocks were, considering what it would have been like originally. Yeah, so it certainly wasn't like every country, anything like that.
Did you take the reading before you put both crops in?
Oh yes, Yes, yeah, that's right. These here, there was soil samples taken, and the other ones were October, I think, so of these soil samples. Now, I actually didn't expect to see any change in soil chemistry. And I thought, well, this is a waste of time doing this, but it wasn't. And I was fascinated by it. And Dean's got the actual full data on this. Yeah.
Colin, just back to Mark's question. I would have thought year on year, your single species soil would get worse and worse.
Yes.
And to keep the same amount of feed for the animals, you'd have to put more and more fertiliser on, which would make it get worse and worse. I would have thought you'd down and downward spiral.
Yep.
And you'd actually see a divergence of...
I think you would too, because this is just in 8 months.
Yeah, well, if you did this for 3 years, you'd get an even bigger profit differential.
I agree. I think that the gain would be greater and greater and greater, because the single species go this way. As a crop, that's exactly what happens.
Which is pretty important.
You've still got your pasture component in there, haven't you?
What was that?
You've still got your pasture component.
Yeah, because pasture, there's grass still in there, so it wouldn't be as dramatic as just a bad
single problem.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So if you are one of these companies who makes their living from selling you fertilisers and all these inputs, you'd be really happy with the right-hand side.
Yeah. If you were selling fertiliser, you would not be promoting this, and that's part of the problem. That's why a lot of this information doesn't get out there. That they have just an interest in not telling people about that side.
Absolutely.
So these two are related to the original, plus 21% is 21% on top of what your first group was.
That's right, of the first test.
Negative 15% from the first test.
Yeah, so on the multi-species, the carbon increase, and these tests were only done to standard soil depths, 10 centimetres, 4 inches. They weren't the deeper ones. Dean and Tom did some deep tests on these paddocks and the property last year, about this time last year probably. Well, it probably was.
And Colin's used the same lab that you guys have used. So the layout was the same, the report was the same, just different numbers in there. And what they did, I think they did less than you did, Colin, is they did a sort of before and after comparison on those tests so you can see together.
But that's interesting. The carbon increased by 21% on there and decreased by 15% on the barley crop, which is a big, just with one crop. It was that surprising.
In how many months?
I think it was 8 months. I think. Yeah.
So the land was then bare. It was always covered in something.
Yeah, it was always covered. It wasn't.
Still went down.
Yeah.
Well, we know from work done by universities in the US that your multi-species cover crops 2 to 3 or even more times water use efficient than a single species.
Yeah.
And like John said, the single species way of doing things is just sending us towards the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the other one, we've turned around, like Graham Hand said, we've turned the car around and we're heading the right way.
Yeah. So the cropping fellows, people that are continuously cropping need to get onto these multi-species crops. Fellows like Grant Sims are doing a great job with it, with multi-species crops, but not enough of the croppers are. There's a growing trend in the US going that way, but here we're still sitting on the hands. But that's the cropping fellows, just to continue cropping no animals, need to have multi-species crops in their rotations. But I mean that's off the track here. There's no croppers here.
Colin, what would you expect the result to be in terms of water retention? Would there be a difference in those two?
It's interesting, and we haven't done that, but in that, if this was just a straight bare paddock, there's a fair chance that the multi-species initially would be removing more water because there's more plants and they're growing more vigorously there. But as that carbon increases, then you will definitely get far better water as you increase the carbon. So initially we'll start, it would use more water than the single species, but longer term, it starts to tip the balance. And more, the higher we can get our carbon levels, the greater water holding capacity we've got. And I've got some slides towards the end of this talk on that, about increasing our water holding capacity. Is a great buffer against droughts and variable seasons, because it acts like a sponge. So, yeah.
There would be infiltration as well.
Absolutely, increase input. But part of what's wrong with our farms now is a lot of soil capping and bare soil, and water runs off. We give it to our neighbours or put it in the rivers or something, but not in our own farm. And that's the best thing we can do to start with is fix our soil structure, and all this process will do that.
Colin, did you do any insect counts?
Yes, there's been insect counts done at home. I've got a little bit on insects here later, but yes, insects at home have increased by 600%. And probably more now. That was done 15 years ago, that insect.
Mostly beneficial?
Yes, a lot of spiders, yeah.
Another thing about the water is under your multi-species, you'd have more microbial activity,
yeah,
and more mycorrhizal fungi function better,
yeah,
and they can access water to 2.5 times better than the plant. So
yeah, yeah.
when you reach wilting point,
yeah,
under the single species, the multi-species are still getting the water.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You've got that wonderful slide that Phil Lee did of the fungal hyphae taking water droplet through the soil.
Yeah, that's, I haven't got it on here, but it's quite amazing that.
You would have more soil shading with your multi-species than your single species too, so therefore less evaporation.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And there's an added bonus which wasn't even planned for in this, was that multi-species has continued to grow and is still growing now. We totally stuffed up my trial. I planned on doing it again this year, but the multi-species just kept on growing through the summer because we had a fairly wet summer.
Yeah.
No way I was going to go and take all that good sheep feed out. The barley crop is just finished, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Well, no crop there. So that was an added bonus which is not even in these figures.
Keeps on giving.
Yeah. So, and phosphorus increased in both, which is surprising, but yeah, by a lot. Calcium increased in the multi-species, decreased in the single species, and the same with magnesium. And down here, not all of the nutrients increased in the multi-species compared to the barley, but if anything dropped, the barley was a lot more than the multi-species.
Just double checking, they are minus signs, aren't they?
Minus, yes,
Yeah.
minus signs,
Thank
yeah.
you.
And this is not new. I just got this photo of David Brandt. I mentioned him a while ago. He's a good friend of mine in America. Dave's place has been researched a lot, but also, it's got also a red radish there. That was with the multi-species crop that had high levels of this radish in it. But look at that, the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pretty well all, everything increased in that as well. So it's not just unique to this trial I did at home. It happened, yeah, pretty well everywhere. So just moving on, we definitely can get insect control, reduce crop and insect damage with beneficial insects by including the flowering plants in there. That's a bit of a long-term thing, but you're trying to restore it again. All this is restoring the farm ecosystem, getting it functioning better. Also disease control. Yep.
That false armyworm that they've got into Queensland is slowly coming down.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be able to control that at all. So they've got to jump onto this surely.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Well, anything that's introduced there's a fair chance there's no natural enemies here in this country. That's the problem. There eventually would be. Things tend not to invade, I know, say weeds, I know it's different to the army word, but like, you don't get weeds invading into really good perennial grasslands or pastures, for example. And you don't get those sorts of problems like insect damage or all that sort of stuff. But we do need to be a bit careful about some of those invasive weeds and introduced ones and that one. Yeah, but
Well, the only solution I would see is a multi-species cropping with it, because you're going to get monocultures are going to be just
it'll happen then for sure. Yeah, and this could be part of the how to manage it. I don't know, but it could be. Yeah.
Generally, if you've got good rich levels, things like that don't seem to be a true problem.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Soil carbon levels. It's certainly no doubt under the multi-species that this is comparing soils on place at home, soils there under the multi-species crop. And by having, as I've said before, I probably shouldn't repeat, having diverse plants will have diverse microbes, and the whole thing just works a lot better. This is some tests we did at home, comparing like a fairly ordinary paddock to better ones, and increase in fungi, 800%, 300% increase in bacteria, protozoa increase, nematode increase, and that's all driven by plants. You know, there's no, when you're sort of getting those increases, it's very positive. I'm going to talk a bit about the practical side of a lot of this now. How are we going for time, Dean?
It's 11:30.
Okay.
So how much more do you think you've got here? A bit over the time.
Depends how many stories I tell.
Can you keep some of the stories to the paddock?
Yeah, keep to a maximum. Yeah. I'll try and get through about half an hour.
Yeah.
That work?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, we can go a little bit into lunchtime, and the time's ours.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Pretty well any cropping, and this is some pasture cropping at home, it should be grazed before you sow it. Not only will that produce any grasses, biomass that's there, but you'll add a lot of nutrients as manure and urine as well, which will benefit the crop. With pasture cropping, it needs to be that was a paddock before we grazed it. We grazed it to that, which opened up that canopy, and then so that's a multi-species crop emerging, which I took only 2 or 3 days ago, in that same paddock. So ideally graze it first. Now we talk about weed control, different types of soil preparation and weed control, and whether it's zero tilling or ploughing and cultivating, 2 different approaches here. 2 different ways of doing it. So, whatever method is used, weed control is very important. The failures that I see are almost always related to not good weed control. And it should not be overlooked. Just because, say you're an organic producer, if you try to grow a crop into a paddock full of weeds, you are setting yourself up to fail, no matter how you do it. So you need to have some way of controlling weeds. Now, whether that is cultivation or whether it's zero tilling, or whether it's herbicide, you definitely need to do something about how you control it. That's really is number one. So, just a bit on ploughing and problems with ploughing and also the same with pesticides. So, we've grown crops for thousands of years. Why do we plough? It's a question I ask because most of my talks are on zero tilling and moving away from ploughing. So I've had to sort of adjust that here to fit what you people want to do. And we can, but we need to be really careful. And we need to understand not only why we plough, but especially what damage it does. So, control weeds, obviously. You do get better germination if the soil is loose and friable. It's called tilth, traditionally. And you get better, and the reason you get better germination is because the soil seed contact is better. Like, think about your vegetable garden, and you put a pumpkin seed in the ground and you tread on it. It seems to be an instinctive thing to do, but that helps germination because of soil seed contact. Conserving moisture, conserving moisture is a fallacy in our working country. We thought we were conserving moisture by ploughing and cultivating for years, which I grew up with that, but it's actually not really quite true. It certainly controls diseases, crop diseases, and also it releases nutrients, especially nitrogen. As we disturb soil, you get nitrogen release. So a lot of the response that people get from ploughing and cultivating is increased nitrogen from mineralisation. But we do kill everything to grow the crop. The damage that it does, it certainly destroys soil structure. Initially it'll look better and soil will be fluffy and you think it's better, but it starts to slump within that 12 months and compacts down again. But it definitely kills soil microbes, and the example I gave a while ago, putting a steel blade through here is actually right. And depletes soil of carbon, causes soil compaction, obviously soil erosion, and that all of that stops water infiltration. Over time, we start to lose nutrients. There's no doubt about that, and that certainly happened at home with my father. He cropped for 20 years straight, and then eventually he had trouble growing crops on there. And the old fellows used to talk about like worn out soil, and it was basically microbially dead. That was the problem with it. This is an example. A fair few years ago, I was in the US in Kansas and driving down the road to a friend of mine, American farmer, and he always had a shovel in the back of his truck. And on the road was a grassland, and we dug up that soil sample, and we jumped over into this bloke's place, don't know whose property it was, and just dug it up. And that was the difference in the soil, just through the fence, same soil. It was quite amazing.
One thing to really wipes out is earthworms. I've done a fair bit of work with earthworms, and that one on the left, that's the effect of earthworms. That's the structure of the soil. Is you can see, if you look at it, there are little pot, dung balls in it, as well as the holes. So that, earthworms is a huge part of what's wiping out.
Yeah.
Colin, does the type of ploughing make a difference? We've got a really compacted paddock that provides some cover crop and has really worked.
Yeah.
We tried to do as little as possible, so we didn't plough, we didn't use herbicides.
Yeah.
We used a worm vermicast for fertiliser. We grazed it down, but nothing really came up.
Yeah.
And we were thinking about doing some, but it's really compacted.
Yeah.
So, but rather than turning it all over, maybe just doing some sort of chisel plough to break up.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and that's a better way to do it. Like if we go back to that, like the old traditional ploughing, that's very traditional, obviously. That is a disc plough, that's a moldboard. It turns soil right up, totally tipped it upside down, and that's not good at all. But chisel ploughs, and I'm going to talk about that, and yeoman's ploughs, where it doesn't tip it upside down, is far better than doing that.
And the soil key idea, which we know has been done for a while, where you just eliminate the top, say, couple of inches, which is that weed zone, which is very different from this sort of significant.
That's right, and that's a better way to go than that. Certainly, we need to get away from that, but we can still do some types of cultivation that we'll get a result from. We obviously need to get a result for many reasons, because fixing our problems, we need to grow a big healthy plant. So we've got to work out a way of doing it, how to do it without destroying our soil in the process. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, and I'll have we've got some slides on that in a minute. So certainly herbicides are problems also, as we know. Herbicides certainly kill soil microbes, even though Monsanto say that they don't. They definitely do. So pollution problems, human health problems, they also kill perennial pastures, so not a lot of difference. One of the problems with the way that we've gone with zero tilling is that all we've actually done was replace the plough with a herbicide. We haven't changed the philosophy of farming at all. We're still just killing everything, but this time with herbicide.
Sorry to keep asking questions.
No, that's
I was speaking to one of my neighbours about herbicides, and I said, well, we don't want to kill the soil biology.
Yeah.
He said, there's no bloody evidence that it kills soil biology. And I thought, well, sure there is, but I couldn't. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, there is, but a lot of that sort of hidden. Certainly Roundup, for a long time they were saying, oh, I don't kill soil biology. But it does, any photosynthetic, it does. But whatever they're measuring, and Roundup increases bacteria, so it changes the balance of bacteria to fungi and other things as well. So it increases bacteria. So if you do just a total microbe test, it'll probably be the same, but the balance is totally shifted. Bacterial soil is not healthy.
Yeah, it's like you can make statistics say whatever you want them to say, kind of thing.
Yes.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's how you measure it. Oh, don't kill anything.
That's right.
The overall numbers are exactly the same.
Yeah, it's useful to have that, to be able to, if somebody, if you're having that discussion, and this guy's open enough to big things, I just do.
If your group could get Christine down here, Christine Jones would be ideal to really tell that story. She's the best on the planet talking about that stuff. And soil carbon, she definitely would answer those no problems at all. Have all that data.
I went into a shop yesterday and the guy boasted he just sold 4 tonne of glyphosate to one farm.
4 shuttles, big shuttle, yeah, that's right. Yeah, 4,000 litres.
To one farmer.
He's got to fix everything in the farm.
So
okay.
How many acres he had, but still.
So which method do we use? So here we've got a bit of dilemma. Which way do we go? The holy grail of agriculture is to be able to zero till organically. That really is. And there's lots of us around the world searching for that holy grail.
Plenty in this room too, Colin.
If we can nail that, and getting close to it. Yeah. But that's really where we want to head. And many people are trying to go that way. So, weed control.
Actually, can I just say, Big No Tills is aggressively working towards that goal to their groups.
Yes, yeah, that's right. And everyone should be trying to go that way. Yeah. And cover crops and multi-species crops are the answer to get to that. It's part of getting there. But no one's nailed it properly yet. So, if we're looking at sowing the crop, if weeds are not going to affect the growth of the crop, they may not require controlling. Like, for example, this is a little bit of pasture cropping sort of stuff. If it's, it's going to go into winter dormancy, like shut down for the winter and not be actively growing, you don't need to worry about it really, because it's not going to affect the growth of the crop. But as we've been saying, weed control with herbicide or combination may be necessary, or it will be necessary if weeds are going to affect the crop establishment. So the seeding machinery itself, it's doing more than just putting a seed in the soil. It should be placed at the correct depth for the seed, and should be sown in a moist soil. Now, we know this. If you're thinking about how we should be sowing a crop, think about how you garden. Now, with a garden, if you've got little tiny seeds, you know you're only just put them just under the soil surface. And all the women here know that because they're the ones that do the gardening. And it should be compulsory for all farmers in Australia to watch Costa's gardening show on Sunday, because we'll learn more about agriculture from listening to Costa than we will from going to most field days. So if it's a small seed, it should be shallow, and the reason why is if it's sown deep, it'll germinate and try to grow, but it won't get its leaves to sunlight before it runs out of energy. So it'll die before it gets its leaves up, so the photosynthesis takes over. So little seeds sow shallow. The bigger the seed, the deeper it can be sown. So that's important to remember. So, but seed drills don't have to be expensive or complicated, and you can convert your own machinery, and quite a lot of people do. And some farmers in Australia for 150 years have been incredibly inventive, and like the harvester, what the Americans call the combine harvester, are ahead of us now. The original ones were invented here in Australia. But anyway, these are just some examples. You may have seen them, and I've taken my travel. The people are pasture cropping with these. That's just an old chisel plough that he's put a seed box on, and these are all zero-till machines. And he must have thought it was really good because he painted John Deere green. So this fella here is at where is he? Bandstow, and it's just a chisel plough with a seed box on it. And they'll get really good results, those sorts of machines. You don't have to spend a fortune on seeding equipment. Embarrassing to own them, but some of them, the one here, it definitely will be. This is a mate of mine, he's an organic producer, Rob Lennon, he's basically a neighbour of mine, and the international combines convert really easy, and Alan John, somewhere just around here, does international conversions. He's a shooting fellow here.
How do you get the seeds at different heights with something like this?
Oh, okay. Behind those, you often put a small seed box, pasture box, a small seed box, and with that, this is again zero-till, and the seeds drop down just in front of that press wheel, the little wheel, that wheel rolls, so it just pushes it into the soil. And the big seeds go through the main box, the main seed box. So, and you adjust the depth of these, points they're called, here, different depths too. So that's all. This is my favourite, this one. But it shows that you don't have to spend much money. Definitely would be embarrassing to own this. But he's up in Tom's country, well not Tom's country, but in Tom's state. That's just a chisel plough, and he put the whole seed drill on top. And he makes it work by winding this lever and driving a little wheel between that wheel and that. Fascinating how he did it. Or you can spend a lot of money if you want to. I was on a bloke's place yesterday, and his father's a doctor, and the father was definitely determined on buying $100,000 John Deere. Because not everyone's got $100,000 laying around. Okay. How do we do this? That was sort of in the zero-tilling chemical side of things. Now, a combination, like a lot of this stuff, like Jason Hagen, well, Jason's around here somewhere, isn't he?
Yeah, not far from here.
It'd be actually worth having a look at that machine, Jason's, and seeing some of his results. That is a yeoman's plough that he's got he put these discs behind and a seed box on. This, that's the results of these crops. What it does, like here, where those tines go, it'll kill about also wide, that wide, which gives you the opportunity to plant something in there, which is what he's done. This is another one for an orange made, same type of thing. But these blokes generally doing these conversions themselves. But definitely can sow crops organically with these. But you still need to make sure that a very, very important thing to do is to graze it short, like I was talking about with pasture cropping, graze it short. The advantage of grazing something short, like if you've got plants growing there, and especially doing it this way where you're planting into green stuff. Now what happens if you've got a plant growing, the root mass underneath will be the same mass as the leaves on top. So if you've got a big plant like this, it's got a big root mass on it. But if you graze it really short or even slash it, what happens is the roots die back to balance the top, the leaves on top. So by grazing it really quite hard, you are removing a lot of competition from those plants just by simply doing that. And not only that, you're stressing that pasture plant deliberately to try and favour the crop you're sowing. So that's an important thing to do, and especially with these machines.
How long does it take for that root mass to lose its weight?
It's the weight, sorry. So just say that again.
How long does it take for the root mass to lose the weight when you...
Not long, it happens within days.
Just slough off those roots,
Yeah, it just, they slough off. It's not
doesn't it use the energy out of the root to put on the next growth on the top?
That's what they're trying to do, yes. Yeah. And again, if you watch some of the gardening shows, if you transplant a pot from, into the soil, they'll often tell you to cut the top off and the roots when you do that. Now, I think the soil key is definitely, it's really similar to what that's doing, but they've got rotating blades on them, so the same sort, it's hard to see it in that, but it's doing the same thing as here, but with rotating blades, and with exactly a better job. I've seen some good results with some soil keys. The main problem with those is the cost of them.
Oh.
That's what scares everyone away. They're $80 or $100,000 or something.
Are they the ones that work in wetter soil? Are they better for?
You do get a better result in wet soils. Yeah.
We've got an old-fashioned version, one of those out here, which we'll take to Andrew's farm, so look at it.
Good, yeah.
And they're not allowed to chuckle.
So we can do it organically with many of those, or we can do more disturbance than that, but I'm trying to find a balance between keeping our soil, not doing too much damage to our soil, and getting a crop result. It doesn't mean to say that if you haven't got these, you can't do something. I mean, you're better off getting something in the soil and growing anyway.
I think that Colin, your other point you touched on, but the issue of timing and leasing versus owning and so on.
Yeah.
There's a few people this week who tried getting a contract party to come in and they never come in at the right time and then you just do.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, there is an advantage of owning your own machine. Not always practical if your acreage is not large enough to justify the cost of the machine. That's why I put some of these conversions in, which people can do, especially if they're handy at welding and stuff. Should you add nutrients or minerals, which is relevant? Did you want to take a photo of any of those others, or you?
No,
I'll get the slide. Slide show.
Okay. So remember, plants drive the soil health, nutrient cycling, and all of that. Plants drive everything. So in other words, it's important to grow large, healthy plants, if possible. And if the limit, when we first start, is nutrients, which it often is in hard, compacted soils because nothing's cycling, you're definitely better off to put some fertiliser in there. Now, that can be a chemical fertiliser, or it can be there's some quite good organic fertilisers now. And someone was doing some work in this group with worm hit, weren't there? Someone
Yeah,
was?
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that'd be really interesting to see how it goes. Yeah.
Not very well. the
Not
first
very well.
time. Still, we've got nothing. We've done a mixed plan at the end 2 weeks ago. So
Okay. So that, because it looks pretty good. Like I mean, worm products are probably as good a fertiliser as any.
Grant Sims is actually putting his seed through with worm, doing it in a mixer.
Okay.
Mixes it all up, he puts worm
Yes.
in it as well.
Okay. He might be using the Nutrisoil.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah, probably.
I'm not sure.
It
about it.
is a good product. Yeah.
He uses his own
I'm
compost.
doing his own. Oh, okay, that's still, yeah. And that's another thing, if people want to, it's work, but your own worm farm and do all that yourself.
So our actually last workshop of the year, which will be compost, biochar, and those biostimulants,
Yeah,
that will cover off on those.
yeah, good.
Maybe with Bill over here will join in on that with his
Yeah.
compost.
Yeah. I already addressed this a while ago. Different seeds, if they're big seeds, you can put them down. Generally, you put those big, like oats and pea and all those, say, up to 50 mils, 30 mils, something like that. But the little seeds are under 10 mils deep. Whoops, what did I do?
Well, you can talk about some of this in the paddock, can't you? Some
Yeah.
of these sorts of things, yeah.
Yep, that's right. Yep. The crop itself, these multi-species crops, will get some alleliopathic effect, especially black brassica, and stop weeds from germinating and growing. I'll move through the pasture crop here at the moment. That's some of the mixes that we also, that's pasture crop, but some of the mixes as that is, that's amongst grass, like pea there and oats and all sorts of things. That's another one. These are all from my place. It's got favour bean in that one, favour bean there.
How do you put favour bean in?
I've got an air seeder, so it's not too big. A favour bean won't go through a normal combine. You're right, but through an air seeder it will.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, it's a good question.
It's funny, we found the favour beans were the last one standing. The cattle and the sheep would just go, yeah.
They
And then
don't.
eventually they would.
They don't like them, but in a mix they tend to eat them.
Yeah.
But they're great
Well,
big
these were in a
pain.
mix, but everything was eaten and
Yeah.
it just leave their heads poking up.
So the more ways of supplying nutrients than supplying fertiliser, some of these that I've mentioned, mycorrhizae I spoke about, but protozoa and nematodes also increase nutrients, or especially nitrogen. They eat bacteria and fungi which supply nitrogen and another nutrient. So that's what we're talking about when we get our soil ecosystem functioning. Fruities being nitrogen fixing bacteria supply nitrogen. So we don't necessarily need nitrogen fertiliser or legumes really. Nothing wrong with legume plants. So here's a bit on just some adjoining paddocks at home. I want to get onto this because this, one soil sample's taken from there and one from there, and Tom was up taking more soil samples there before, like whenever that was, Christmas time or something like that I think it was. So that's the results. That's the soil on the left-hand side there of that paddock, and that's the other one. It has over 200% more carbon than that one now. So it's sequestered over 200 tonne of carbon dioxide. In other words, it's removed, just per hectare, 200 tonne of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and stored it in the soil as carbon. The only thing that's done that is plants and plant diversity. So we can definitely increase soil carbon, no doubt. And that's a far greater amount than the little trial we showed you before.
What period of time is that?
That was over about a 10-year period, so you're not going to do it overnight. Not to depth. The interesting thing with this is that it's increasing carbon at depth at a higher percentage rate than in surface. So there may be limits on soil types of how far you can increase it, but there's no real limit other than a bigger rock in depth. So down to a metre, it's still increasing, the carbon is. So all this is definitely possible. And interestingly, all the soil nutrients, all of them, have in that soil increased by an average of 162%. And there's no fertiliser put on that.
Everyone tells you that young water get pH up as 9.
Not a pH of 9.
Nine.
Using lime.
Okay, right. Why has it increased without putting lime on it? We need to be careful with lime. Lime should be, we use lime to fix pH and it will, but lime probably should be used to correct a calcium deficiency. Now, we don't necessarily, if we get everything functioning right, the type of stuff I've been talking about, our pH will improve. Soils will balance themselves, and it seems like it must be alchemy or some strange thing. How can this happen? But it actually does, and I'll give you a reason why in a minute, how this actually happens. But yeah, that's it. How do you do that without lime? There's been no lime put on, and the calcium levels have actually increased. A couple of things are happening. Because we've got a root system going far deeper now than we did before with the annual plants with little short roots, we've got a big root system, so it's bringing nutrients from depth, so over a far greater range, and cycling them. That's where most of this is coming from. Some of it could also be coming from the parent material that I mentioned before, like soil microbes releasing those nutrients out of the parent material. And I think I've got this data here, and I'm not going to dwell on this data, but it actually has created an academic argument all around the planet. And Christine Jones and I took these samples a few years ago now. You're not supposed to be able to increase the totals, but the totals have all increased, except for the things we don't want, which is iron, sodium and aluminium. And that they've generally decreased. But it is quite fascinating that if we get it right, in other words, old Mother Nature will drive it for us really well. That's some quite very interesting data. Need to repeat that again to see if we still that's still.
Cole, what it really tells you is the soil tests we do are as good as they can do for the money you spend.
That's probably a good way to do it.
Like if you wanted to really test your soil for get 100% result what's in it, you give it to a geochemist. And he'll charge you a lot of money. So what that tells you is the soil, you might have got a total soil test before, and now you've increased the totals. How can that happen? Well, the soil test didn't tell you the full story.
In the first place. Yep, that'd be about right, Tom. Yep. Okay. So this is another thing too. We mentioned before, carbon levels about moisture in the water holding capacity in soil. This is what happens. Say a 1% increase in carbon to a depth of a foot can increase the water holding capacity of soil by an extra 186,000 litres per hectare. That's nearly 17 millimetres of rain. But it has that water holding capacity on every time it rains, and if it dries out a bit, it's got that capacity to hold that again. So it's quite dramatic. I mean, that's a good enough reason to increase carbon levels on its own.
That's a huge water tank. Each hectare.
Yeah. And what that's done at home in a practical sense, you see green growth on the shoulders of like earlier in the summer and the end of that just hangs on longer, especially when it gets dry. So the question is, why aren't these methods adopted more widely? Because, and that is the question. There's a lot of interest in regenerative ag around the world, But in the scheme of things, it's a small percentage. So why? If this stuff's so good, why isn't it adopted more widely? Yeah. Some of it is this. It's puzzled scientists. It is against what science sort of knows. But so there's some other answers out there, and there's some information that Christine Jones is presenting now on how does this happen, which is a step forward on from where the science is. So after increasing plant diversity and restoring soil ecosystem, we do often see dramatic and fast changes in plants and soils, and it has puzzled scientists for many years. And it is against what many people believe is possible, especially scientists. But so what is going on here? Because here's me and many of us now saying, well, hang on, we can fix this really easy, and we can. But the other side of that is saying, well, no, we can't. We've got to put even fertiliser and everything on to get the changes. So how are they happening?
So the money is still holding us back.
Yeah. Well, why would you research something if you research something that you can't make any money out of? That only the farmers can make money out of. That's a fair. Yeah, that's about what's happening. Soil microbes drive the change. Well, we sort of knew that, and I said that earlier today. So how do soil microbes stimulate change in nutrient cycling, plant growth, plant seed suppression, and overall change in the ecosystem? It happens, we know it happens. We have people all over the world getting these changes. So, here's my mate again swimming around. Remember that soil is a living, breathing, subaquatic ecosystem. It's alive. Unfortunately, we've treated it like dirt for so long. You know, it's not dirt, it's a living ecosystem. And a huge, diverse soil food web, and incredible diversity. Far more diversity in the soil than we've got on the surface of the planet.
Colin, just excuse me.
Yeah.
And just bearing in mind that we want to carry on with this thing next year as well.
Yeah.
And we've got show the examples of what people have been doing.
Yeah. Oh yes. I've got about 1 more minute left.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is just summing it all up. Yep, only 2 or 3 slides left. So, to understand this, if we look at bees and other insects, a bee colony, a bee on its own is a fairly dumb, stupid thing, you know, really. It hasn't got much of a brain. But you put a bee colony together, and it's amazing. It actually can keep its hive at exactly 37 degrees. They communicate with each other. They know where flowers are and different things. As a colony, they're actually a superorganism. One bee on its own is fairly useless. So, okay, with that in mind, microbes can also work together as a superorganism. If we get enough diversity, and remember we've been talking all day about growing these multi-species crops to improve our soil, improve our microbial diversity, and restore our soil ecosystem, then we start to get microbes working together as a superorganism. Totally different world. We've shifted it from here to there. So, in the microbial world, the term quorum sensing refers to density-dependent coordinated behaviour with microbes that regulate and express gene expression in the microbial population and or the host plant. So in other words, they're changing the genes in themselves and the plant itself, which is fascinating stuff. And obviously, Christine Jones explained this a lot better than I can. So, microbes in the soil or plant can switch the plant's genes on or off. That can stimulate plant growth, plant health, create tolerance to drought and plant disease suppression. This is a fascinating little bit of film That's actually a plant root pumping sugars into the soil, root exudates, feed soil microbes. So it's microbial diversity. Microbial diversity and numbers are created by plant species and numbers. So the more plants we have, the more microbial diversity we have. And they produce a diverse range of root exudates. That diverse range of root exudates feeds a diverse range of microbes. So we're building numbers of plants and microbes all at the same time. So that's what actually makes things work. And it is fully regenerative. We talk about regenerative agriculture, and it's totally plant driven. So that's why, just to sum all this up, plants to restore our farm soils and profit, and sound ecological practices and agriculture should function together. Thank you.
So you're down at about 600 almost, and not much is going on. There. Yeah. Right, now take a step behind Colin over here.
600.
Where it's green. And where it's green, now have a crack at that. Now. And keep going. Well, something's happening, isn't it? There.
Oh, wow. So look at the gauge while that's a perennial plant. That's what that plant's doing.
There's a water pipe there.
See? You can hear the reason why that is. So the idea is that you see for the same pressure how far it'll go down, right? And then if you want to see, since you're involved with this garden, see what's going on in the garden. See if you're doing the right thing in your garden.
Yeah. Oh, look at the Let's keep going. I think we finished it. We hit 400 there somewhere.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that's an intro.
Yep, that's good. That's really good.
Carl really loves
So this is the same as what you planted out in the paddock?
Yeah.
Colin, when you emphasised you must remove or minimise weed pressure when sowing a multi-species cover crop, you're talking about sowing into that, or is that the same competition as a weed? Because so you've got growth there and you've got things happening, but is that because they're going to terminate? They're
going to terminate. We know because they're warm season plants.
Yep.
They're as they are, as the frost told us, they're going to terminate next week or now.
Yeah.
So they're not going to compete with what you sow in as a winter species. However, if you sowed something into here, all this stuff out here, you're setting yourself up to fail without doing something with these plants just here under our feet.
Yep.
That's totally different. Like the same thing, if those plants there were warm season grasses, say summer grasses, and most of our native grasses, the same thing applies. First frost, they're going into dormancy. So the same thing, that's how we could pasture crop into grasses that you can pasture crop into anything that we know goes into a dormancy, whether it's a summer dormancy or a winter dormancy, and whether it's a perennial or an annual. Like we know annual plants will just finish their growth cycle, but perennials go into a dormancy period, and we can grow crops into those in that dormant period.
Provided that almost the full kit, the full set of what's growing in that area is going to fall dormant.
That's right. You can grow crops into, if there's a few of the other ones there, but you want it. So there's not too much competition.
Yep. I took that as a really strong point from you.
Okay.
For success,
I think,
you've got to minimise that.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think Grant Sims was saying that he actually plans some of his cropping operations on that termination. So he'll include some species that he knows are going to get out of the way, and then he can come through and actually harvest what's left.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so he's a bit strategic like that, which is pretty nifty.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a lot of the learning, isn't it, that's occurring now? And you're coming back to one of your first slides today, which always have a living plant growing.
That's right.
Well,
So from that point, you've got grasses, you've got your pasture, you would have warm season and cool season in that mix.
Yes.
So if you wanted to sow a winter mix, you know that the summer ones are going dormant.
Yeah.
How do you deal with the winter ones?
It depends on what you have. Like in this environment here, now you happen to, it wasn't always this way, but now you have mostly cool season C3 plants, cool season plants. So the main fit naturally here is actually a summer crop into these grasses, because they're going to go into summer dormancy, because they're actually all winter species. If you've got enough moisture. And or your soils are holding enough moisture to do that. Now, it's surprising, around these areas here, like I looked at Kyneton rainfall a few weeks ago, and I think it's 43% of your annual rainfall grows from October to March through the summer. So it's almost half an hour. Where I am, it's 50% fairly equal, summer, winter. Not that much different. So you do get enough summer rainfall.
Yeah, that's different than
That's chalk and cheese.
Once you hit Elphinstone, it just changes rapidly.
Sorry?
It changes rapidly once you hit Elphinstone before you get to Colin.
Yeah, well,
Kyneton's
whatever.
on the top of the range, on the divide.
Whatever, check on what your rainfall is, and you'll find you'll probably get more than you think. And especially as the soils start to increase and improve, and you get better, more carbon and water holding capacity, anything starts to become possible.
Well, like I said, after we had that storm, I decided to put the summer ones in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Colin, what about the mallee and the Wimmera, the massive broadacre annual cereals? How do you keep green material on that ground?
One of the ways of doing it is there's a few. Those broadacre croppers should definitely be including some of these covers. I mean, true covers.
On a rotation or
on a rotation. In Western Australia, like with extremely low rainfall, it is difficult. Like West Australia is a true Mediterranean climate. It does hardly rain in the summer at all. I think they get 20% of their rain in the summer in West Australia. Now, the main fit there, and quite a few now are doing it, is perennial cover cropping or pasture cropping, because it'll grow anyway. And that means warm season grasses, even in that rainfall, and dormancy can grow the crop then. That is an answer for those areas. And the thing that I get often asked, what people often say, is that, warm season grasses don't grow in Victoria. It's interesting if you look at reports of early explorers, and George Angus Robinson. He did. He recorded through a lot of, probably through these areas here too, about grasslands in the 1830s, and in January everything was green and looked like a wheat crop in the wind, and they were summer grasses. So Victoria was covered in summer warm season grasses, same as the rest of Australia. So you can certainly grow them again. They were here originally. I'm not suggesting any of this stuff is easy, but
yeah, because
you can do
now
it.
we're dealing with less organic matter in the soil to follow it, continue it.
And that's why you need to do it in a transition. Like you can't do this overnight, so you transition into it. And these multi-species mixes are part of that. Getting fixing the soil on the way.
Yeah. And even after everything got grazed down, and we'd think, oh well, nothing else really wants to, no point putting anything else in there, and there might be a gate left open so they could go elsewhere, they'd come back in there again. So they actually preferred to get back in there and just nibble what was there. Yeah, it's sort of interesting.
Up further, well, it's real good for Laris and Coxfoot, and because we had a massive spring last year, I wasn't going to cut it, but I ended up cutting it. And they had the choice of where they wanted to go at one stage, and quite often they'd be back in here again. But you sort of try and control it a bit. And besides that, I was right up against the forest there, and real hungry country. In parts of the Phalaris and Coxfoot did well, but right against the forest itself, it was bare. We had a winter crop in there last year, and the buckwheat did super well up there. And the others, the kangaroos got fatter, so we did miss out on a lot of grazing, but anyway, that's okay. And then I come in 20 metres from the forest, the trees and that, and replanted again with the summer. We had a great germination, and that would have been in December, and then it came in really dry, and the kangaroos had another gorge themselves again, I might have put the stock in there once or twice and then back out. And then it came in real dry, so I just sort of left it. But we kept on, the millet just kept on coming up, even though it got flogged. And since that's had the cattle and the sheep in it, continually, and the sheep are in there now to knock it right down so I can go through and put the winter one in any time now.
Yeah.
I might even start tomorrow. I'll pull the sheep out, the lamb, and then go straight in there. But the buckwheat up there, did real well. Didn't, I haven't grown that before. I haven't grown most of them before.
No, buckwheat's interesting. It's a summer grower, and it actually will accumulate phosphorus. It'll increase the phosphorus levels of soil. So, and that's probably why it did well on that lighter soil. It seems to be able to source its own phosphorus. So it's a good one to put in these mixes. It's summer mix.
Because there's a lot of sorrel and nothing sort of thing up there. Which is just real ordinary. Look at the hill where it planted phalaris and cocksfoot years and years ago, which is up in the rocks and everything else. I mean, we've got food like that, you can still sort of see the remnants of it. It's all interesting. But that paddock there used to grow a lot of lucerne in there, and this one. And when I first went to grow it here, I was told, no, you won't grow it here because the aluminium levels are quite high here. But I grew lucerne for a lot of years, and dry land, we used to get 3 cuts easy. And at one stage used to be able to irrigate, and we got up to 5 cuts. So at the 5th cuts it used to get a bit slow, and then I realised you go out spotlighting, it was full of kangaroos. And sometimes you go in there, might be a dozen or 15 hares in there too, it sort of gets too many. But the trouble with the lucerne though, it's nice like that, but then you look between all the plants and it's all this capped ground.
That's right.
And it erodes like anything, especially once it grows down, it just blows away. Especially the sheep have been in on it, and it just becomes dust.
Lucerne's overrated really. It's great for cutting hay, but it's not good for soil.
So what's the answer for a legume then? In that?
Nothing wrong with having lucerne as a plant. It's an amazing plant, but we should and if you want to cut hay, that's fine. But as a grazing plant, it's got problems like. It'll grow through the summer, but it's really a C3 or a cool season plant. So if it gets hot in the summer, it just drops its leaves off, just when you want to graze it. So as far as that goes, put it in a mix. Don't sow it on its own. I mean, we shouldn't sow anything on its own. Lucerne with other plants is great, but not really on its own. Not unless you want to make hay or something. Nothing wrong with lucerne, but in a mix.
Those radishes, I don't know, you saw Sue chewing on one down the veggie garden there before. We grew them right through the winter, had radishes like that. Planted them in the summer in this paddock, and we had them again. And they grew rapidly in the summer. And it got pretty dry, they kept on going.
They're an amazing plant, they're certainly well worth putting into
easy growing.
Mixes.
And tasty.
And you see with the cattle or the sheep, you chomp them up and then you think there's nothing left and then they take off again. There's radishes in here, but this was really hammered until this was greened up just from that little bit of rain yesterday or the day before. But so I don't know. I think the Yeomans has helped this. Probably any deep ripper would probably help it. It's got the moisture down there a bit and broken it a bit. But it's just something different to do. You get a bit bored doing the same thing all the time, or I do.
You mentioned earlier that this was like a didn't grow much. This paddock.
It was a pesky paddock. It wasn't real good. Couldn't grow a crop. I only tried it once.
That's right. Anyone here have any idea? I'll just throw the question out. Just looking across the paddock, why it wouldn't be a very good paddock? It's fairly obvious, it will be, I hope, but unless someone notices it.
Too much compaction, and it's had years of it's on a floodplain, and it's been wet, and then it's been dry, and then it's been wet, and then it's been dry, and then it's been overgrazed, and then it's like gone into a collapse.
That's right.
I think what Andrew said before, because like, I know that Andrew and I've had lots of conversations, and Sue too, about like use of keyline plough, and I'm a keyline plough person from 100 years ago. And even here you can see Andrew's made the effort to go a bit on contour, and not that tendency just to go up and down, which is like the lazy way of doing it. But like working with the soil and then getting the oxygen back in there again and getting the moisture back in there again, it's almost like you've increased your rainfall without getting more rain, because we're putting water back onto the dry bits, and then getting the microbes back working again, and then the cover crop, the residual from that increases the microbial activity. So it's a far more holistic way that Andrew is approaching these paddocks now, and even talking there, like it's gone from being the crappy paddock to the paddock that actually produces something. It's putting weight on his animals, and it's a nice place to come to and work on. So if that's the least that can happen, well, that's a damn good thing, isn't it? And then that gets back to that complexity too. And that's what multi-species is about, is complexity. As you were saying with the lucerne, there's no point just putting lucerne in because you're not getting complexity. And nature doesn't function without complexity. It's always complex. So that's how you get fertility, which is exactly what Andrew has just described you got. That's what it really boils down to. Thank you very much, all the free nitrogen. Thank you very much, all the free carbon, without any particular effort other than just changing the way he was thinking about farming. Simple.
I must say Dave Griffiths took the hand of the levels and that. He picked it out and that, and then I just tried to follow what he put in place.
Do you remember what the soil carbon content level was in the test, Dean? Tom?
Here was about 1.1 or 0.95 in that sort of range. I think your biggest paddock was over in the corner there.
Over the other side of the road.
The other side, yeah. But this valley is probably all much the same. We've got interesting here, we've got dung beetle evidence, but I don't want to steal you.
No, away you go.
So
they're active now.
So this is summer dung beetles, the little ones, but over here you've got evidence of some of our dung beetles that have jumped a bit and come to Andrew.
That's blue on it, that one.
That's the colour there.
No.
They are, they're very active now.
Good job.
What sort are they? Come on.
These are bison, these
Bisons, yeah. But they are very active now.
You knew that anyway, didn't you? You're just testing me.
I was checking that. Remember.
So you can see here the colour there. What do you notice about that? As distinct from the other ones.
He's got the clay coming up. That's how far they're taking the down.
So how far down is the clay, Andrew, do you reckon?
Fair distance.
Fair.
So far, probably. Yeah, no worries.
So, yeah, that's the amazing then. So the bigger holes, and you don't see this evidence because they don't go far down. The little ones don't go far down as these ones do.
No, but you go where the cattle are at the moment.
No.
As soon as they drop it, they'll just about be there.
Yeah.
When we were at Flying Grove the other day, seems as they're into the beetles too, or one part of the family is. There's a few of us have got beetle farms for another breed, and they moved their cattle, was it 5k, Sue, or something?
Yeah.
And they said there was none up here where they were, but they followed them up there. And
that's a surface clod.
Yeah.
And that one's further down. So there's not only a compaction layer further down, and Dean's picking that up, but before it was ripped, it didn't grow anything. I mean, nothing much is going to grow in something like that.
That's right. And in winter, it's wet.
It's wet, yeah.
And the water doesn't go down. Yes. And then it's just dry hard in summer. So
and it's interesting too. A lot of you'll get compaction layers, and they'll plate. They'll go this way, and you'll see it level here. But this doesn't seem to even have that. It was fairly ordinary as far as soil structure goes. But that'd probably be related to use of ploughing, I think.
Well, that'd be part. That's what I was just going to say. It's part of the history of this valley too. This used to be all cropping too once.
Oh, it would
in
be
the old days. This was
good
cropping.
soil.
This was cropping and horticulture. This was fruit trees and cropping.
Yeah.
Well, partly because they had horses, and you need to grow about 30% of your land to grow enough food for horses. But this would have all been moldboard ploughed.
Yeah.
Which is what those old ploughs that used to be over there, weren't they? Moldboard ploughs. And
that's right.
I've done a lot of work with moldboard ploughs back in my younger days, but they are renowned for creating an incredible pan. But plus they invert the soil.
That's right.
So really, within probably 50 years of starting to farm here, they would have already started to deplete whatever natural resource they had in terms of organic matter and carbon, because it all went into the sky, or it washed away.
There's a lack of organic matter.
Very little organic matter in that.
So Colin, is there another way of doing what Andrew's done here?
Yeah, there is. This way will do it faster.
Yep.
Like ripping like this will do it faster, but. And what Andrew's done is right. You need to get something in. Like if you rip it, Pierre Yeomans, who developed the key line, had it right. he'd have nailed pretty well everything if he'd have planted things like we're talking about now in those rows. He did a very, very good job on it. And it just, and now we're looking, a lot of this stuff is close to PA yeoman stuff, but now we're just adding something, we're adding plants in here to have that full time. Yeah.
Get some organic matter into it. Yeah.
But yeah, there is other ways of doing it. Like you can do it totally biologically, and you could do this without ripping it. And yeah, we'll talk about that. If you want to do it with zero tilling, you definitely could do it, but you'd probably use herbicide on it. I would leave those perennials there, like don't kill them, in other words, so then you start to use a selective type herbicide. Keep them there because they're part of fixing it. And then you sow a lot of things like radish and turnip and all of those multi-species crops, and then repeat it, like I said, then put a summer one in, then a couple of years, and that will also fix this. But it's slower than this way.
Yeah, well, you need horsepower to run this one.
Oh yeah, especially through that you would need horsepower. Yeah. So you put the summer ones first if you're wanting to fully restore the function of like a grassland on a property.
So that's pasture cropping we're talking about now.
Just establishing
no, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Just restoring a pasture.
Oh, okay.
You do it in that order. You put the summer ones in first, because then it's easier to. You'll get a better result planting into a summer grass when it's dormant in the winter than the other way round. But if you say had fescue growing, it's better it's difficult to sow a warm season plant into that, more difficult to sow it into that than the other way round. Did you get all that? Understand that? I think you did.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I've got a problem paddock for you.
Okay.
And a lot of people have in this area. Come over this fence line.
Righto. The problem is, how do you get rid of these all these rushes in here?
Light it. That's temporary.
Put the yeomans
to
down
solve
deep
any
and
problem,
drain
you've
the
got to understand why they're there.
Where?
Yeah, in this paddock. So
not just on the flat, but they go up the hills. They go all over the place.
These are all native plants, and naturally they're along water courses. In grasslands they don't get out into a paddock like that. So and they like anaerobic soils, or soils that don't have oxygen in them, and so that they grow in like low-lying areas and swampy type areas naturally. So what's happening here is that, and it's fairly obvious, we can see it out here, there's a compaction layer about whatever down, and in the wetter years the water's sitting on that, and it's called a perched water table. So then you've got anaerobic soils that these things love to grow in. So I mean, okay, it's interesting. Like one of the things you'd do was to sow perennials in it, but even that hasn't been good enough. You've got phalaris in there, and they're still growing. So that compaction layer is still there. So even that phalaris hasn't busted through it, and it's a pretty tough plant.
Very tough.
Yep. So the way to fix it, I reckon, is what you've done here. If you can rip it down and break up those compaction layers, then you'll aerate the soil and they won't want to grow.
Yep.
You'll kill a fair bit of phalaris in the process, but I mean, but that's the thing to do. But did this paddock have rush on it as well?
Oh, only on this fence line here.
It's a wonder it didn't. Maybe you'd ploughed it or ploughed them out at times.
I've only ever ploughed this once, but before we had this, I don't know what they did to this paddock, but oh gee, it was never very good.
Yeah, even the rush.
They must have hammered it and hammered it.
Even the rush wouldn't grow.
And they possibly cut grass off and cut grass. So they made it, cropped it and cropped it and cropped it. I don't know the
crop living out of it.
history.
Plus you get a transition here from floodplain to like more sedimentary as you move up the hill.
So Colin, you wouldn't focus on sort of ploughing them up. It's just ploughing the soil.
No, don't
Just run the yeomans through it.
Yeah, run the yeomans through it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything aggressive.
In deep enough.
Just yeah, it needs to be deep enough. Whatever those layers are.
Get it to work properly with the draft control on the tractor. I don't know who knows, if anyone of you know what draft control is. Draft control is control your slippage by the pull of whatever implement you've got on, like on a penetrating implement. So you set your draft to the depth that you want, and it maintains that depth fairly automatically. And you also set up when you get too much slip, it'll lift the implement a touch out of the ground and keep you going basically at the same level, but just enough to give you enough traction to keep going. Like I said, we couldn't get that to work. Down the bottom we got the wheels to stop with the draft set right down, but I couldn't get it back into draft again. So it might take a bit more learning off the tractor. They may have another control somewhere, I don't know. I don't know much about John Deere's, even though
I'll pull out
advertise it.
I'll have the operating instruction manual out on the table tonight.
A question, have you used or anyone used it with the two front tines off, just wider spacing?
Yes, we also make a machine where we only using rear tines, like say those rear tines as an example, and coulters in the front of those tines, right? Yeah. So if you don't want to tear your pasture up, but you want to aerate, you can do that. And then we also have an aerator roller, only a single roller at the back. That's got tines about 200 millimeters long, and they are vertical when they're about 20 degrees off dead center on the pipe. So they come in and they come out, and they just open that hole up, and that's those tines are only 10 millimeters thick. Okay. So you're only getting surface aeration with that.
Okay. Yep. Because then this machine would do sort of the type of thing out there that if you that wide. With that seed box, it would do that all that in one pass that he's been doing out there. So you'd have you wouldn't have full soil disturbance, but no
problem. Like we've got those, but I didn't have a machine to bring for that, and that's not my machine anyway. So I wasn't sure what we're doing. But Dean got this machine, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a loan machine.
On loan. So I didn't know what it was about. What we're trying to demonstrate with this is that the power that's required. When you're looking at on our system with the power, we use about 1/3 of the horsepower for yeoman's tine per tine. And then when we got everything working right with the rollers set right, Further down, we've got a pretty good tool.
Yeah.
But up here, I couldn't get it down. And
Well, I pulled it up here
operating
anyway, and I
again.
didn't.
And that would work with these, putting more down pressure on
Yeah, well,
those,
what with this, what you do normally as well, what you can do, how much pressure you want, you'll set your rollers to your penetration depth as well. So use it for your penetration. So if it depends on what layer you got underneath. If you got a clay layer, you might only just want to scratch into it a bit. And always say, like, don't forget that your topsoil is based on your subsoil. And to turn it upside down with a moldboard plough, it's a totally wrong thing to do. But to bring up maybe 5 or 10%, you will create more topsoil. Right, and that's what it's all about. If you create a topsoil with the organic matter in the topsoil and your biology working, your water retainment and whatever, and also your drainage is important as well. Right, it's not it's just retaining water in the soil mightn't be good enough because you might get it waterlogged, but you also want to drain as well.
Well, how far are you?
Okay, no, that's all.
Well, maybe you just think probably when you're 20 minutes
How's this box work?
Can you put more pressure on that drive wheel for the seeder? Because that was slipping a fair bit.
But I couldn't get that to work.
Yeah, because this was slipping a fair bit coming up. So this was actually slipping coming up. Like there wasn't enough pressure to sit that down to drive that. That was actually skidding. And sometimes